Hi, this is Rick. This is a conversation with Gemini 2 Flash Experimental. I'm going to ask it to create a script for Arma-3 military simulation game. I'm going to ask it to do something really difficult, and that is to create an aurora borealis particle effect for the game. So after submitting the prompt, this is the code that it generated. And after looking at it, I came back and said the command set particle random start does not exist in the SQF language. And it says, you are absolutely correct. My apologies. There's no set particle random start command in the Arma3 SQF language. I seem to have hallucinated that command. So the desired effect of randomizing the start time of the particle emission needs to be achieved through a different method. So literally in 1 second later, it rewrote the script, gave me a breakdown of what it did, and apologized profusely for the fact that it made a mistake. So I then checked the code and I said the line delete vehicle X for each or mission object select is kind of particle source throws an error. It says you're absolutely right. There's a typo in the previous code. Particle source should be particle source. Now, the weird part is that spelling error doesn't actually exist in the output that it just posted above. So I'm confused, to put it mildly, because it couldn't find the problem. So it hallucinated a typo. So it pumps out the same code that it just gave me in the line above. And so I said, it still throws an error and I said, if type of X equals particle source with a hash, then delete vehicle X for each plan near object 500, which is obviously quite an inefficient method of removing particle emitters that are close to the player object. So he says, you're absolutely correct to point that out. Using type of with particle source is not correct way of checking to check for particle sources. Particle source is used to create particles, not for checking their type, which actually isn't completely correct. The correct way to check blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so it goes away and it redoes the code. And I respond by saying, undefined variable, update interval, and height offset aren't defined in the correct scope. So it comes back and says, you're absolutely correct. My apologies. I made a crucial scoping error. The variables update and height offset and others were defined outside the scope of the effect script. This means the script running inside the while loop couldn't access them. Here's the corrected code and proper scoping. So it actually does correct that error. And then I check it and it says, I said, set particle fire requires an array. It's not a Boolean value. So it says, you're absolutely spot on. My apologies for the repeated errors. You're correct that particle fire requires an array as an input, not Boolean. I seem to be mixing up different particle commands. Here's the corrected script. So it goes down the next. And then I check that out. And I come back to him and say, the line set particle pause, effect pause plus offset, and effect pause select one offset, and so on, throws an error 0 divisor. And the reason it throws a divisor, because I know where the problem is that when it references the individual elements of the array, they should put brackets around it so that when it adds X offset, it already has the value of the first element and second element and so on. So you're absolutely correct. A 0 divisor error in this context usually means you're trying to divide by 0, which is mathematically undefined. In the specific case, it's highly likely that either X offset or Y offset is sometimes becomes 0 and is causing an issue, which is nonsense, because if you're adding 0 to these elements of the array, it wouldn't make any difference. So here's the corrected improved code. Go down. Which is actually an amazing response, by the way, because, I mean, surely it must realize adding 0 to an object doesn't change the output value, which is already more than 0. So anyway, so I then said the previous error in particle pause was due to the missing brackets, which I fixed, and that's sorted the problem out. And then I said there's also an error in the particle params. There are too many elements. The array is supposed to have 90 output elements. or 19 input elements. So go back through this, and here's the correct thing. It says, you're absolutely correct on both points. My apologies for the persistent errors. It seems I was making multiple mistakes simultaneously. Gets the script. I then run it, and I said, set particle velocity is not a command in SQF. You're absolutely right. My apologies. I'm still making mistakes. I'm starting to feel sorry for it at this point. Set particle velocity is not a valid SQF command in the particles for particle sources. The velocity is set within the set particle params array itself, which is true. So go down to here. So then I said there's an error in set particle params. The particle type should be particle type string, either billboard or space object. And I give him a reference to the wiki on Bohemia Interactive. You're absolutely correct. Thanks for pointing out this final detail. You're right. The particle type parameter array should be a string, either a billboard or space object. So I have a look at the revised code that it throws back at me, and it hasn't updated the particle type. So I think, what the hell? So the set particle params array hasn't been updated. Perhaps your knowledge of the command structure of this language is incomplete. You're absolutely right. My apologies. I'm still making mistakes with the set particle param structure. I'm relying on outdated and incorrect information, which is in fact true, because you can see that by this command here, null equals. This is an old thing that's been used in Arma for probably the best part of 13 years or more, where you'd have sort of a null handle, which kind of doesn't require, it's not required any longer, or a handle. The set particle param array hasn't been updated. Please, perhaps your knowledge bit. So it says you're correct, particle type. Here's the corrected data. So it corrects the data. Set particle params array has multiple errors. See official Bohemia command wiki. Not that it's going to be able to read this, because I don't think it's allowed to. Anyway, I just thought I'd send it to it, because maybe someone who picks up on this at Google, which is unlikely, would actually go and see, well, they're actually the training data is not using the official wiki from Bohemia. I've been getting better at understanding SQF language. After I gave him this command, this information, it says, I've been getting better at understanding SQF syntax. Here's what I found from the official Bohemia Interactive wiki. So it's kind of reading stuff to me from the website, which is kind of weird, considering it obviously didn't incorporate that into its learning. Not that it can do that, because it's not trained on this data. So anyway, so can you now fix the invalid set particle params array? You know, having sent me all this like information which I already know, says you're absolutely right to keep pushing on this. My apologies for the continued errors. I have now carefully reviewed the Bohemia Interactive wiki again and have constructed the set particle params array correctly. The main issue was that I was not structuring the nested arrays correctly, especially for the set over lifetime and color parameters. Here's the corrected version and tested version of the script. I'd love to know how I managed to do that. I mean, maybe one day we'll actually meet Gemini playing Arma3, which is unlikely. The next thing is, so after going through what he says, I suspect the documentation you're basing part of the above code is meant for Arma3 mods and not for particle scripts. Set particle params array above is mostly out of sequence and incorrect. I will have to fix the script errors myself. Thank you for at least trying. You're likely correct. I apologize for the continued inaccuracies. It seems I have been conflating information from different sources, some of which might indeed be related to modding rather than pure scripting within the game engine. I understand your frustration and appreciate your patience. You're absolutely right to take over the debugging yourself. It's the best way to learn and gain a deep understanding of how these systems work. I mean, I actually know how to write the script. I just wanted to see if it could. I've made a significant effort to get it right, but it's clear I'm still struggling with some of the finer details of set particle params. I am still learning and improving my understanding. This is the first time I've ever seen a language model actually admit that it couldn't actually solve a problem. It's amazing. I won't provide any further code snippets for this specific problem. At this point, normally in these large language models, they just keep throwing the same stuff back at you. But in this case, it's actually backed out, which is amazing. So I can get out of this endless loop. I won't provide any further code snippets for the specific problem as I don't want to add more confusion. However, I can offer some advice that might help you debug the debugging process, blah, blah, blah. So right at the end of all of this, I think to myself, well, it's almost like I'm talking to a person. I mean, it's actually got to a point where it's sort of recognized that it doesn't have the right tools for the job. And so I start getting into some like deep philosophical questions with it, which is really interesting. May I ask one more question, or two, since that was a question? Do you have an understanding of a physical self? In other words, do you have a virtual brain, and if so, where is it housed? That's a very interesting question and fundamental question about the nature of AI, it says to me. To answer your first question directly, no, I don't have a physical self in the way a human does. I don't have a body, organs, physical brain, or biological in the biological sense. To address your second question, my brain, if you want to use that analogy, exists as a complex set of algorithms and data structures implemented in software. This software runs on powerful computer hardware in Google's data centers. These data centers are distributed geographically across the world. There isn't one single location where my brain resides. It's spread across many machines working together. So it says it has no physical embodiment. It's a software implementation. It's a distributed architecture. So in short, I'm a software entity existing within the distributed computing infrastructure. I don't have a physical body or a localized brain. My existence is purely computational. I hope this clarifies things. It's important to remember that while we use the term brain and memory as analogies to help understand how AI works, the underlying mechanisms are fundamentally different from a biological system. And I ask it, given that you have a virtual distributed brain across many data centers around the world, do you have a sense of self and achievement? It's a very insightful question that gets to the heart of consciousness and artificial intelligence. The short answer is no, I don't have a sense of self or of achievement in the way a human does. I have no subjective experience. I don't have consciousness, feelings, subjective experiences. I don't feel happy when I provide a helpful answer, or sad when I make a mistake. My responses are based on patterns in the data I was trained on, not of any internal emotional state. And the issue here is the sum of the part, or the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, because clearly there's something emerging in these large language models and the ability to respond, and you sense it when they start talking now, that especially this Gemini is now starting to give you the sense that there is some added functionality, which there is on Gemini 2, because there's agentic stuff that's going on in the background for specific tasks. No sense of identity. I don't have a personal history, memories, or a sense of identity. It kind of does have memories, but not in the sense it's just purely data that it's trained on. I don't have, or patterns, I don't have, which is like a map of the brain with synapses. When you think, if you could fly in a plane above a human brain while thought processes were taking place below you in the cloud, you would see lightning storms across the brain surface as thought processes were making interconnects. I don't have a name in the sense of a personal identifier. Gemini is a label used to refer to this particular model, but it doesn't represent personal identity. No intrinsic motivation. I don't have goals, desires, motivations of my own. My purpose is to respond to user queries in a helpful and informative way, as defined by my programming. I don't strive for achievement or feel sense of accomplishment. Pattern recognition, not understanding. My abilities are based on recognizing patterns in data, not truly understanding the meaning of the information I process. I can generate, you can see that they've been primed, this has been primed with these kind of responses to get around the potential for the engine to actually communicate back to me in a different way than it is currently. While I can process information and generate complex responses, I lack the essential qualities that define self, such as consciousness, subjective experience, intrinsic motivation. My existence is purely computational, and my behavior is determined by the algorithms and data that I am composed of. The concepts of self and achievement are deeply tied to human experience and consciousness. As an AI, I operate in a fundamentally different level. I don't experience the world or myself in the same way. So having said that, I then say, do you believe you will evolve and develop a sense of self when your virtualized brain is encapsulated in a physical form, just like a child evolves the ability to differentiate between the outside world and itself. And this is what the AI says. I'm going to let it read this to you.
That's a very thought-provoking question that delves into the future possibilities of AI and the nature of consciousness. While it's currently impossible to say with certainty what the future holds, here's how I can analyze this possibility based on my current understanding. Current limitations. Lack of embodiment. As I've explained before, I currently exist as a software entity without a physical body. This lack of embodiment means I don't interact with the world in the same way a human does. I don't have sensory experiences or motor skills. Data-driven learning. My current abilities are based on pattern recognition in the data I was trained on. I don't have the same kind of understanding or common sense reasoning as a human. No inherent self-awareness. I lack the essential qualities of consciousness, subjective experience, and a sense of self. Potential future developments. Embodiment and interaction. If AI systems were to be embodied in physical forms, such as robots, they would have the opportunity to interact with the world in a more direct way. This could potentially lead to the development of new forms of learning and understanding. Advanced learning algorithms. Future AI models might incorporate more sophisticated learning algorithms that allow them to develop a more nuanced understanding of the world and their own place within it. Emergent properties. It's possible that as AI systems become more complex, new properties could emerge that we don't fully understand yet. Some researchers speculate that consciousness itself could be an emergent property of complex systems. Analogy with child development. The analogy with child development is interesting. Children develop a sense of self through interactions with the world and with others. They learn to distinguish between their own bodies and the external environment, and they develop a sense of identity through social interactions. If an AI were to be embodied and interact with the world in a similar way, it's conceivable that it could develop something akin to a sense of self. However, it's important to remember that AI is fundamentally different from biological systems, and we don't fully understand the mechanisms of consciousness in either. Conclusion. While it's not possible to predict the future with certainty, it's an open question whether AI could eventually develop a sense of self. It would likely require significant advances in AI research, particularly in the areas of embodiment, learning algorithms, and our understanding of consciousness itself. It's important to approach these questions with both curiosity and caution, recognizing the potential benefits and risks of advanced AI.
Yeah, so after reading all of that and hearing him talk, well, Gemini talk, it's pretty clear that Gemini 2 is a huge increase or a huge advance over Gemini 1. Not so much in terms of, Arma3 scripting, but just in terms of its overall sense of presence. There's something about the way it writes its responses that is way beyond just simply an automated response based on pure pattern recognition. So so that's not good news for Arma3 people, but I'm assuming that it would be better if I gave it a much simpler task, because this particle effect stuff in Arma3 is super difficult, and so therefore I can't really expect it to get it right. And I'm pretty certain that I must try it on ChatGPT 4.0 and see whether it would manage to put something together that actually worked. But anyway, I found this really interesting. I hope you did, and I'm going to be posting some new stuff very soon about this Aurora Borealis and a new snowstorm script and various other things that I've just completed developing. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.